Hello and welcome to the final episode of the Full Bottle Podcast for 2023. I'm your host, Matt.
And I'm your host, Gabby. What have we got in store for today's episode, Matt?
Well, Gab, I think we saved the best for last. Today, we're joined by the big boss man, our CEO, Nathan Hancock, who's going to run us through the year and the season that's been. Our guest and topic probably don't need much more of an introduction than that. So let's get straight into it.
Hello, how are you, Nathan? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Gabby. Thanks for having me.
No worries. What have you been up to?
Well, I just come back from some meetings in Sydney and got it delayed out of the Sydney airport. So everyone, well, actually delayed, actually cancelled. So everyone who travels around the country for work, you know what that feels like. And having an extra night somewhere you weren't expecting it, yeah, makes it just a really fun day. Anyway, comes with the territory.
Yep. I usually cry when my plane's delayed, so I can't even imagine when it's cancelled completely. I'd probably just be on the floor.
Well, you learn to take it on the chin, and it's
nothing personal.
Nothing personal. There's no point getting worked up about it. So,
Well, before we get into the nitty-gritty, no special treatment here. We're going to begin with our Fast Five. Just a quick Fast Five.
Sure.
So what was your first job?
Well, really, it was when I did an apprenticeship after school. In year 10. I left in year 10 and went and did an apprenticeship.
What kind of apprenticeship?
I'm a qualified fitter machinist.
What's that?
It's like fancy mechanics.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Fancy.
We built small drill rigs that worked on the back of trucks that were doing exploration mining around Western Australia.
Oh, interesting. And the last book you read, and can you tell us what it was about?
The one I remember the title of was The Survivors, which was a Australian author, I think, and it was about some survivors. I really can't remember.
Significant. What was the best pet you've ever had and why?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I've mostly had dogs. We did have a Japanese fighting fish, but it threw itself out of the fish bowl, and that wasn't that great. It didn't survive that. Probably one of my dogs. I've got a dog at the moment, everyone knows probably. His name's Pedro. It's actually my daughter's dog, but that became my dog immediately because the people who pick up the poo and do the walking are the actual dog owners, as we know. So, yeah, he's pretty cute. He's got a mind of his own, though. So I had a different dog called Red who was very obedient and much more of the typical faithful friend, whereas Pedro's got a bit of an attitude.
Pedro would rather be left alone, thank you.
That's right. And bring me a treat also.
Yeah. Pedro's got cat personality.
He really does, yeah.
What's the best place, or where's the place and activity you go or do to relax?
Look, I used to do a lot of walking. I haven't done that for a while. It's starting to show around my midriff. Yeah, the floods came up and washed the paths away around Mildura. I sort of haven't been doing it as regularly.
Do you have a life saying or a motivational quote that you use regularly?
No, I do. My family thinks I do say a lot of old man sayings.
Yeah.
So I rattled quite a few of them off, but not anyone. I don't like to overuse any of them. So, yeah.
Okay. Just have a dictionary of them, do you?
That's right. Yeah, I roll them out pretty regularly, and they apparently are starting to record them so that they can carry them on into the future for the future generations, of which I have one. I recently became a grandfather. I don't know if you're going to ask me about that, but I'm going to throw it in there because I think that's what recently grandfathered people do. So, yeah.
Well, maybe they can borrow some phrases from my book. When I started here, I started writing down stuff that you said, like just reading the tea leaves and
one of my, yeah. It's one of those things. The other thing we do here at Citrus Australia is record when people mess common sayings up. They can be pretty funny too. So yeah.
Spaghetti hits the ventilator.
Yeah, those sorts of things.
Well, let's get into the serious stuff.
Sure.
While the spread of our national crop mean there's never really an off-season in citrus, the core part of the 2023 season has essentially finished. Can you summarise what sort of year it has been for production at that standpoint?
Yeah, sure. Like you say, there's still plenty left in the year, I suppose, with lemon and lime to be picked, and also the Valencia season's getting off to a fairly heated start with really quite good prices being paid for citrus. Valencias at the moment. But yeah, the main navel and mandarin season is coming to an end. There's probably a little bit of fruit being tidied up. It's been one of those seasons that you'd rather forget, just due to those significant impacts of cold, wet weather again through La Nina, which we're glad to hear is shuffled off into the distance, and now we're contending with the El Nino to the future. But yeah, just the small fruit, and in some cases still some albedo and softer fruit, has meant that returns haven't been as strong. The fruit's been very small, which doesn't really suit all of our export markets. It does suit some, but not all of them. And so the prices have come back, and I think combined with all of the costs that growers are still absorbing from, buying fertilizer or the cost of their fuel, things that haven't come down like that, energy prices still very high and not coming down. Yeah, it's very hard to make those lower returns work with these increased costs. So we're very aware of that. I think there's, such a lot of other things that have really impacted us too. And that some of those are going to be long-term things, like the changes in HR legislation. The impacts of that are yet to be seen. I think there's quite a few things that growers need to be aware of, especially if they're using the PALM scheme. But even things like the working holiday maker visa and other issues are going to continue to impact us. The increase in the minimum hourly rate paid to workers and the impact of the piece rates is really significant. And really we're seeing the 38-hour week starting to bite us too. So there's just a lot of different issues within HR and labour that we're working on, which we don't see a lot of, bright lights at the end of the tunnel. There's quite a lot of work involved across a range of horticulture industries, all lobbying the government to hear our pleas that this is not going, we can't find any way to make workers productive. They're really sort of slacking off now, knowing that they've got an hourly rate to fall back on, and they don't have to pick the fruit at the rate that they had before to get a reasonable income. And that's really bad for profitability and productivity from the grower's side. So we need to find some midway between what government's trying to do and what industry needs. And that's something that comes up everywhere I go, the labour issue. So yeah, I really feel for growers at the moment. So many of the things that happened through the pandemic and the subsequent issues around the supply chain, whether it be difficulty moving crop, in Australia or overseas, all of those costs as well as your inputs, I think are starting to improve. But things like energy and labour and probably the cost of water are going to be significant as we go into El Nino, as I mentioned before. And it's touching people all around the country. It's not just the Murray-Darling Basin where we're seeing pressures, but all throughout Queensland as well and in Western Australia. So yeah, water is going to be, I think, another significant issue for us. And if you don't mind me keeping on going,
No,
you normally
it's okay.
normally will have jumped in by now. But anyway, I think the other thing that's perhaps not on the radar of industry as much as it should be is the Labor government's announcement last year. Was it last year or was it this year? It was this year, on at budget time, just slapping an extra 10% tax on biosecurity. Now, we're all about improving biosecurity in Australia, but a 10% tax on industry is not the first place the government should have started. There's a lot of work that's been shows that there are a lot of risk creators out there that aren't contributing to the overall sustainable funding of biosecurity, and we want them to be looking there, in particular the risks associated with container movement. Container movement's been enormous in terms of its growth here in Australia. With it brings risks of pests either harbouring on the outside of containers or inside the containers, the structure of the containers, or actually inside the goods that are in the containers. So we've had a number of incursions into Australia that have an impact on industry. Not always the citrus industry, but other industries have really suffered from things like the brown marmorated stink bug, for example, that came in innocuous things like washing machines and tiles and those sorts of things. Got nothing to do specifically with the citrus industry or the horticulture industry, but bring in pests that really impact us. And so we want to see the government actually put some effort into taxing that side of the risk maker. And I think the other thing is the rising number of people that are travelling to Australia. Again, now that we've opened our borders up, got immigrants, more immigration coming, but also just the huge number of people coming to Australia on short-term visits on holiday. And the more I'm in this game, the more I hear of people who bring material into Australia illegally for their own reasons, largely because they don't realise that the product is here in Australia. They could grow the varieties they're looking to grow. And that creates a huge amount of risk for us in terms of introduction of things like HLB or Xylella fastidiosa or citrus tristeza virus. Why do they give these things such hard names to say? No wonder we call it CTV and HLB. Anyway, so there's a lot of risk in that, and we're doing the best that we can in terms of trying to address it. But I think making it far more clear at the entry point and paying a tax for biosecurity that's only for biosecurity. One of the big problems with the biosecurity production levy that the minister announced was that it's not actually tied to biosecurity outcomes. It could end up being used for anything. So, yeah, there's a lot of work in there. We've put in a submission. I also wrote a submission on behalf of the Plant Industry Forum, which I'm the chair of at Plant Health Australia, really advocating for a review of what the minister's proposing and to scrap the biosecurity protection levy on industry and focus on other areas of the risk matrix. Sorry, I'll stop there. You probably want to say something. It's your podcast.
No, this is the Nathan podcast now. What I've gathered from everything you've just said there is a lot of these issues shared either throughout the horticultural industry or throughout the whole entire agricultural industry, which is, I don't know, kind of not hopeful, but it's just something almost positive out of it that you're not in this, not just one thing. The citrus industry is fighting on this alone. It's a lot of industries trying to make impact here. So
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Something.
Yeah, the collaboration that we have between other pig industry bodies is really, really important. These things like labour, water, biosecurity are really common in their nature, and you can form shared positions between industries that help, that voice. And we've worked with the National Farmers Horticulture Council, which I think has been pretty useful in its advocacy for industry, including the citrus industry.
So exports are an important part of the Australian citrus industry. How has the season gone in international markets this year?
Look, really pretty positive in terms of volume, because the last couple of years, the volume was starting to go down. And up until 2019, we'd been on a year-on-year growth curve, which was really positive. And we all got the shock of our life in 2020 when COVID was announced, and we started to see those impacts later on in 2020. So from a raw numbers point of view, year-to-date figures are showing that we are ahead of where we've been at this time in the last two seasons, which I think is really positive. And I think we'll finish strongly this year with good export results in broad terms. Now, I know that a lot of growers will be experiencing much lower returns than they've experienced in the last, say, 5 or 10 years, where we had some pretty record years with great volumes exported and also really good money being paid for that fruit. And as I mentioned earlier, the wet and cold conditions have really contributed to a much smaller fruit size, and that's been reflected in the payments that we're receiving back from our international markets. So whilst the demand's there and there's been an increase in volumes sold, the value is less, and we know that growers aren't seeing quite the same returns. I think the other thing that we haven't really touched on is that the fact that the Australian and the international economies are all suffering from post-COVID. Some of them are returning more quickly than others to what they were before. And I think we can say that there's a bit of a light in the tunnel if our export volumes are increasing. At the same time, we're seeing improvements in economies, and some of those financial corrections that have happened are starting to improve, and I think that bodes well for future years. Just staying with this year though, Korean market has really sort of stepped forward as being a great market for us. Vietnam has been a good market for us. I think it'll be a toss-up between whether Japan or China finishes as our biggest market this year, whereas Japan was clearly our biggest market in the last couple of years. So it's good to see that China market is starting to reboot. It was the powerhouse of the industry for a number of years in a row, and we'd like to see it strengthen, continue to strengthen and continue to grow on the trajectory it was prior to the to the pandemic. I think positively too, the US made it into the top 10, of year-to-date figures. I don't know where it'll finish. There's still a couple of months to go in the year, but for the USA to be up in the top 10, quite a positive too. I think there's a trend there to wanting Australian produce again, and that there's the quality that we grow really suits that market, and so that's quite positive, especially considering North America was one of the most badly hit routes in 2020 and 2022, 21 and 22, because of the impacts on shipping and the long waits that fruit had in the containers there. We thought it might be some time before the Australian industry got interested in that market, but it's rebounded quite quickly. So yeah, look, lots of positives out of the raw numbers, but we know when you dig into that there'll be some growers that haven't made the same returns that they've wanted or received in the past, and that's going to be significant on their bottom line.
Yeah, it feels like recovery or growth isn't linear, you know?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's nice to see an uptick after a couple of years of downtick. So
yeah,
is downtick a thing? Anyway,
I think it's just a big cross. Slightly irrelevant. I saw, on Snapchat, you get memories.
Yep.
And I had a Snapchat memory of maybe 10 minutes past midnight in South Australia on the finish of one of our lockdowns. And it was the McDonald's, and the lineup for all these cars lined up at McDonald's as soon as the lockdown finished.
Yeah.
I thought, God, that feels like a lifetime ago.
It does, doesn't it? You still, because I travel a lot, I still see a lot of people wearing masks in the airport and that sort of thing. And if it wasn't really for that, you could almost forget it had ever existed.
Yeah.
Which I'd like to maybe forget that.
Yeah. Can you highlight any market development that's been going or being done to improve the prospects for Australian citrus in export markets?
Well, Gabby, that's a really interesting question, and thank you for asking it. Look, to be honest and to be serious, that was a bit glib. A lot of what we do in terms of market access actually takes a long time to show up. So a lot of the things that we do have really long lead times in terms of results. But that's not to say we're not out there doing that work all the time. And some of those things, have ticked over in recent years and made a difference to our overall market development. But David and his team are, working on the daily with distressed cargo and those sorts of things. So they're your really short-term things when someone has something stuck either here in Australia and can't get it out, or going into a market, there's a problem with a probe or there's a problem with paperwork. David and his team are really great at resolving those. In terms of technical market access and providing advice to government, we've been working on a range of different things that have had some results recently. So there was some work we did with the federal government on improving the audit times that they do, which we're hearing is starting to take effect, and growers and packers in particular are reporting that their audit time is drastically reduced, which is really great to hear. There's other things that we do in country to support Australian exporters, like the KCT export program, the online program that Mara's been running the last 12 months or so, and she's had some really great feedback, both from the department but also from our growers that are using the system in terms of her work and efficiencies she's able to bring to resolving issues that come up. Without that KCT program that we instigated probably 7 or 8 years ago now, I guess, if it wasn't for that, no, it couldn't have been that long ago anyway. Without that, it would be nearly impossible to export the volumes we've been exporting. And yes, it does have some issues around waiting for China to prove block numbers and those things, which we saw happen recently. But really, without that system and the mapping that's going on behind it, it would be difficult to imagine that China could be as strong a market it is with all the protocol issues that we have. So there's that. I think the other thing that's significant, and I mentioned Korea as being a really great market for us this year. Well, without Citrus Australia's help in bringing Korean inspectors into the country, we wouldn't be able to get the volumes over to Korea that we have. And so, again, David and his team, especially Mara, have done a lot of work in providing a system that brings the Korean inspectors over, sees them settled in, supports them through the year, and then gets them back to their country safely. And that's meant that market, which I think is around the 12 or 13,000 tonnes at the moment year to date, is significantly growing compared to a few years ago where it just was stagnating and we weren't getting much growth at all. So there's that. Then there's some things we're doing offshore in terms of our representation, either at trade shows like Asia Fruit Logistica, where we're going and putting our stamp on, international trade and making sure that the Australian citrus flag is being flown, and supporting businesses that want to come over there and meet their customers and to know more about their markets. And then we're also arranging things like in tours into India, into Vietnam, for people to understand the market a bit more as well through the APMAC grant that we received, and assisting our government and our industry to understand, what we might do to try and grow that Indian market into the future. I think it'll be something that perhaps you and I might do a podcast on in 10 years, or the two people that replace us in future might talk about how India has become, a really growth market for the industry. But I think it will take time. And I think there's a range of different things that we do. A lot of them sort of go unnoticed in the background, and then people reflect that things have improved in an area, or growth in a market, and it can be traced back to some of the small changes we've been able to affect in a protocol or a process that the governments are following. Those sorts of things, as well as opening up the opportunity in market for people to meet new customers and do those sorts of things. So I think there's been quite a bit we've done.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like it. It's also been a busy year for everyone else at Citrus Australia. Can you recap some of the highlights from our organisation over the past 12 months? Sure.
Look, I think we started the year with a really great forum here in Mildura, Market Outlook Forum, which really tries to, it was one of our flagship communication tools in terms of explaining the vagaries of the market and what was happening in international markets. That's been really positive in terms of explaining to the parts of the industry. It's not only marketers. A lot of growers do attend it, and I think more should, to understand what the impacts are in the markets of things like economic policies in other countries, or the protocols that are affecting fruit movement, or trends in supply from other countries. We should never think of ourselves as the only exporting nation from the Southern Hemisphere. We used to be many years ago, but we're not anymore. We've got significant competition from countries like South Africa and Chile, and knowing what they're doing is important to your forward planning. So, the Market Outlook Forum, which will be rolled into our Australian Citrus Congress into the future, was quite a success at the beginning of the year. We've had, as I mentioned, some trips over to Vietnam and India. We've also had presence in Thailand and Philippines in terms of opening the season to the market there, and bringing attention to the market. And I think the Thailand market has really benefited from our interaction on behalf of QCEG, which is the Queensland Citrus Exporters Group, and the work that they do in funding that. We've really raised the profile of Australian mandarins in Thailand, and that market has grown quite strongly over a number of years. And just the Philippines was another strong market this year, which we helped get open just a few years back, and 10,000 tonne market to date this year is significant. And I know it's smaller fruit, but you've got to have markets for small fruit as much as your premium. So I think those things have been really important. Jess Lai has continued to do a great amount of work in biosecurity preparedness, and this will be boring to most people, but we've put a lot of work into preparation plans and working through those implementation plans to make sure the things we need to do as an industry are getting done, and that we don't all stand around and point fingers at each other when there is an incursion. We'll actually have had a lot of the work done. And, thank you to the committees that are behind that, like the Citrus the Citrus Pest and Disease Committee. We did start a new committee called the Future Production and Technology Committee, which has been really great in focusing us on what the next 5 to 10 years should bring, how we get involved in that and make sure that technology is coming to Australia, etc. Our communications program has been really strong. Yourself and Matt are doing an awesome job in terms of all of the types of communications that we're doing, whether it be this type of thing with podcasts and our social media, but also the magazine, and supporting us in our regional forums, which we've run in the last couple of months as well. So I could go on and on. There's quite a lot of work that we do. And as I said, it's quite often it's in the background, and it's not until you're reminiscing on it like an old person that you remember what changes have happened in 12 or 18 months, 2 years, whatever.
Now, looking ahead, what are the prospects like for the Australian citrus industry in 2024?
Yeah, look, I think positive. Going back to my earlier comments around the market and the fact that our exports grew this year despite small fruit, I think so far the seasonal conditions are looking relatively good. And and, touch wood, we will see some larger fruit this year, which will really meet our export countries' needs. And I think, the horizon for improvement across economies that we rely on in Asia in particular and other parts of the world that we export to, I think there's positive signs there. So that means there should be money for our product, and I think that means we'll see better returns to growers too. So I think largely pretty positive. Yes, we've got some headwinds with some of the things I mentioned before, and, we can't shy away from the fact that we are growing more citrus year on year. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of expanding those markets that we have access to. And we're lucky in the citrus industry that we have access to over 50 countries. A lot of industries in Australia don't have the type of market access we do have. And so we do have that opportunity to diversify where our product's going. So I think there's a lot of positives in terms of 2024. And I hope that I'm not mistaken, but I think that's a realistic outlook that things are going to continue to improve.
Onwards and upwards.
Yeah, bar any pandemics.
And one of the highlights in 2024 will be our Australian Citrus Congress, like you mentioned before, taking place on the Sunshine Coast, 5th and 7th of March. Can you give us an update on this event, how it's coming together and why I should be buying a ticket?
Sure, absolutely. Look, yeah, the program is coming together really well. We've been doing a lot of work on that, and we've been sharing that load around with people within industry, but in particular the Future Production and Technology Committee that I mentioned a minute ago. I think the thing that really stands out to me is that this is a world-class event. Citrus Australia has been recognised as holding really impactful events, and this is just another one of those. It's got a really great lineup already of international speakers, and I know that some people might think that going to the Sunshine Coast is a bit expensive, or seems a little bit crazy. Why aren't we doing it in a growing region? My answer to that is we can't fit the size of event that's sort of been created in a regional town, and we'll keep looking for opportunities to do that. And if there's an exhibition centre or something built in a regional town, then we'll take that opportunity for sure. But for now, I think if growers can consider coming up to the Sunshine Coast as some time away from the farm, as a little bit of relax time if you want to take it. But I think really the opportunity to network with others in your industry is one of the things that's always recorded as one of the highlights of what the events that we hold. We've provided plenty of opportunities to do that. The resort means that everyone's staying in the same place, and that means there's more opportunities to catch up with each other. And the more I'm in the industry, and have been in the industry for a number of years now, the more I observe people engaging with each other and being open about what they do and taking those opportunities, the more I see them grow, and the more I see those opportunities growing, and people, making breakthrough decisions and really leaping ahead in terms of their business success. They've identified partners they can work with. They've identified issues that they couldn't resolve on their own, and they've shared those with other people and worked out how to fix some things. So that networking part of it, as well as the content of the program, is really, really significant. It's very difficult to imagine getting around the world to see the speakers that we've pulled together from different parts of the citrus universe, so to speak.
Yeah.
People from the USA, from China, from Thailand, from Indonesia, from it goes Brazil. That's a really significant number of people. You couldn't fly around the world and see all of these things. So you've got to look at it from that perspective, the opportunity that we've brought to Australia for you to learn from internationally respected speakers. Some of them just work on farms just like you do, but some of those farms won't be much bigger, and they might have a lot more intel in terms of the different ways they grow in different regions around the world, and that provides information to you that could be very, very useful. And look, we've been very focused on trying to bring a program that is setting Australian growers up to be profitable, to be globally competitive, to continue to grow the best quality fruit that we can, because that's what we really trade on is our quality. And of course, doing it in a way that's as safe to the consumer as possible, because food safety, sustainability, those things are more and more creeping into what we would call technical barriers to trade. I mean, we want to do that anyway. We want to grow very good quality, safe product, but there's more and more likelihood that they will be things that stopping us from doing trade unless we can show our credentials. So the program is really designed to help growers take the best opportunities that they can to bring technology onto their farm in really simple ways. It doesn't need to be, we're not saying come and see the new robotic harvester. That's just not a thing. But how can you use other autonomous tractors or other technologies on farm that really improve what you're doing, taking some of the labour cost out of what you're doing? Because that's, a really crucial thing is to reduce the amount of labour on your farm. How can you do that? How can you grow the trees in a different way that improves your labour work but doesn't cut back on your productivity in terms of the volumes that you're growing? All of these things is what we're thinking about and trying to make it so that there's a pathway or something that growers could follow in terms of ways to modernise your orchard and take advantage of the next 5 to 10 years under pretty tough conditions with labour costs, water costs, those sorts of things. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's it's a internationally dense program. There's lots of people there speaking from their experience from other countries. You'll learn a lot from that. You'll learn a lot from networking with fellow people. And if you take the opportunity to come up and see the Biosecurity Symposium the day before and the field walk the day before that, you'll get a lot out of that week. It won't be just a week away without any results. I think you'll find you feel like you've invested in yourself or your employees if you're sending staff. So, yeah, get onto the website, have a look. More and more information coming onto there daily. And if you want to give me a call and have a chat or one of the team have a chat about the program, then please feel free.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't wait. I'm excited.
I'm too.
Well, thank you so much for taking some time today, Nathan, and talking to us.
No problem.
I hope you have a good rest of the year, and we'll see you in the new year.
Yeah, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, cheers.
Cheers, bye.
Bye.
Well, Gabs, what a fascinating chat you had there with Nath. Thanks to our guests for tuning in to another episode of the Full Bottle Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it as much as what we did. But if you didn't, leave us some feedback using the link in the podcast notes below.
Unlike last year where we did a Christmas wrap-up, this is our last episode of the year, as the last Monday of the month is Christmas. In December, that's less than 30 days away. If you're listening to this and suddenly got a jolt of anxiety of unpreparedness, you're not alone. What are your Christmas plans, Matt?
I'm off down the beach actually, Gabby, getting away for a few days, which should be nice. What have you got in plan?
Oh, I'm not going to the beach. That would be nice. No, it's on the family farm this Christmas, so lots of preparation. Hopefully it's not too hot, otherwise it's just going to be a big nap fest.
Sounds like a good way to do it.
Yeah. We hope you have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We can't wait to bring you a bigger and better podcast in the new year to all our listeners. So watch this space, and until next time, keep it juicy.
Ho, ho, ho.
Merry Christmas.